This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Michael Linden is Managing Director for Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress, who argues that focusing on the deficit hurts economic growth. Centrist Democrat Elaine Kamarck applies old lessons from her party to the current Republican Party. Namely, party unity gets in the way of figuring out the best policies for winning moderate voters. And Bill Press talks with Congresswoman Colleen Hanabusa of Hawaii. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Progressive budget expert Michael Linden tells us something obvious, that Congress can't walk and chew gum at the same time. He urges lawmakers to stop letting budget issues get in the way of programs that would help the economy. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Michael Linden is Managing Director for Economic Policy for the Center for American Progress. His work focuses on the federal budget and the medium and long-term deficits. Michael Linden, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, always a pleasure. And, you know, you've written recently that while we do have a long-term deficit problem, focusing on it keeps the economy from growing. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, and it's not that that's always the case, but it has been the case for the last 3 years. It's not an economic law; it's just a political reality from the last 3 years. And what's happened is that the concern over deficits over the medium and long term has prevented us from doing the sorts of things that we need to do right now to get unemployment down to a more reasonable level. And that includes investing in infrastructure, setting up pre-K programs. That includes even things that shouldn't have any impact on the budget, like raising the minimum wage. It's been very difficult to talk about economic problems because the deficit has dominated the debate. And while that may have been reasonable 3 years ago when the budget projections were really quite concerning, it's just not the case anymore. The budget projections have really become quite tame.
So it's time to stop bickering and pointing fingers and actually get down to do some work.
Yeah, it's time to stop letting budget concerns hijack every other concern that we have. It's not that we have balanced our budget or solved every problem, that the budget faces, but it is true that those problems have been partially solved and have been pushed way off into the future, and it's time to focus on some more immediate problems that we have facing us right now today.
Now, in a recent article, you conceded that 3 years ago there were good reasons to be concerned about debt and deficits, but not now, as you know, we've sort of touched on that there. But would you really have said 3 years ago that deficits and debts were that important? I mean, what has changed?
I would have said, and I did say 3 years ago that deficits and debt were important. What has changed is two big things. One, of course, is that the deficit and debt projections have improved. We've done things that have improved those projections, and healthcare costs, which are a big part of those projections, have actually been much slower than we expected. So those two things combined have allowed us to really have allowed the projections to come way down. The other thing that's happened over the last 3 years that wasn't true 3 years ago is we now know that Congress does a terrible job of walking and chewing gum at the same time. There's no reason why they couldn't have done at the same time long-term smart deficit reduction and combine it with short-term job creation and investment measures today to get the economy going. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, but what we've learned is that Congress can't do that. For whatever reason, they're just politically incapable of doing that, and so they focused on the deficit reduction to the exclusion of today's economic challenges, and we learned our lesson. We can't keep letting budget concerns trump everything else, especially now that the budget concerns are much less dire.
Well, okay, and so now we know. Now we know it's not as bad. It's not, so what should Washington be doing instead of focusing on the deficit? What do they need to do?
Though they need to focus on the unemployment rate. They need to focus on getting people back to work, and especially on young people getting back to work and the long-term unemployed. These sorts of long periods of unemployment for young people, especially, but for everybody, have economic consequences down the line, and it's a real disaster. It's a kind of slow-motion disaster, and what Congress should be thinking about is how do we fix that problem? How do we get America back to work in good middle class jobs? And so that's the challenge. It's been the challenge for the last 3 years, but because of deficit concerns, we haven't been focusing as much on it as we should have. Now that those deficit concerns have subsided, it's time to really focus like a laser beam on that unemployment problem.
We're speaking with Michael Linden, Managing Director for Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. Another issue with this, though, that we seem to constantly hear about is when the president says he wants to do A, then immediately the Republican leadership says no. It doesn't matter what A is. It doesn't matter what the goal of A is. It doesn't matter how much you can prove that A would work. We're not going to do it. That's a pretty big roadblock, too, deficit or not.
It's a huge roadblock, and it's something that we pointed out in our recent report, that it's not as if progressives and liberals and Democrats haven't tried to do long-term deficit reductions in a big way, in a smart way. It's that every time we come to the table, the other side kind of pulls the table further away from us. So it's a real challenge, and it's one that we sort of got to stop trying to kick the football with Lucy pulling it away every time. We've just got to stop. Again, we are afforded the luxury of stopping because the deficit projections over the next 10 years have improved so much.
You know, and you hear these, recently there was yet another report about the bridge infrastructure in this country. Bridges in this country are falling apart, you know, and we've seen some pretty tragic occurrences of that. There's a perfect shovel-ready program that could be put to work right away, you know, and it's not going to cure things, but it's a good start, and it you know, then those guys are spending money, and it seems so easy to me to go ahead and get this done, and then everybody wins.
Yeah, it's true. And again, in a rational world, that's exactly what we do. We are going to have to repair our roads and our bridges and our airports and our ports and our train systems. They are falling into disrepair. We're going to have to fix them at some point. Let's do it now when A, interest rates are really low, B, we have an unemployment problem, and doing this will help. And now is the time to do that. Put those folks back to work, and as you mentioned, it will have ripple effects in the wider economy. And since we're going to have to do it anyway, let's just do it now. A few years ago, before President Obama took office, and the right wing kind of lost their minds, this would have been uncontroversial. This exact idea would have been completely uncontroversial. Both sides would have said, yes, this is great. Let's spend a little money now. We'll make it back in terms of improved efficiency. Certainly, the economy will benefit from it. Let's go ahead and do that. Unfortunately, you know, we've gone into this strange alternate universe where even uncontroversial things have become super controversial.
Right. I mean, they can't even pass a farm bill, for goodness sake.
They can't pass a farm bill. They can't. They can't do anything. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Now, everyone on the left hit the ceiling when sequestration came to pass, but almost no one seems to see any ill effects. But there are ill effects, right? I mean, why is the public, including some Democratic lawmakers, blind? I mean, there's a lot of cuts there that are affecting a lot of people, right?
Yes. There's a couple of reasons why. Unfortunately, I think lawmakers are a little bit blind. One is that a lot of the cuts are hurting the people who unfortunately do not have the loudest voices. They're hitting Head Start children. They're hitting low-income families. And those folks just, in general, don't get the kind of hearing in Congress that they should and that they deserve. The other reason is that it's a little technical, but basically a lot of agencies are able to kind of patch things over and make things work this year with money left over from previous years by foregoing some in capital improvements or investments that they are hoping they'll be able to do in future years. They're able to kind of make things work this year. If sequestration continues into next year, a lot of those techniques are going to fall away, and the pressure will build. And the other thing, of course, is that when sequestration did hit people, everybody knew it in the form of, for example, long lines at airports or long delays at airports, Congress immediately fixed it. They fixed it in a completely stupid way, frankly. They borrowed from a fund that was set aside to improve airport infrastructure, which we're going to have to do eventually to make it work. But they immediately fixed it because people were screaming their heads off about it. I think we're going to see a lot more of that as sequestration goes into effect for next year as well.
Peter, Pay, and Paul. We're speaking with Michael Linden, Managing Director for Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. You say Congress can't seem to walk and chew gum at the same time, at least on the economy. So what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that, again, I always think about this as in a rational world, you could do short-term job creation measures like a big infrastructure investment, for example, and at the same time you do that, make reforms to Medicare or Social Security or to the tax code in the future that would reduce the budget deficit without harming the economy in the near term. Those things are not mutually exclusive. That's walking and chewing gum at the same time. Fixing the economy now, fixing the deficit later, doing it at the same time. Great. We should be able to do that. Congress has not been able to do that. They have only been able to focus on one or the other, and for the last 3 years, it's mostly been on how do we fix the long-term deficit problem. And so the short-term economic challenges have gone unaddressed. So that's a real problem. And if that continues, then we've got to just say, okay, we've done a lot of walking or we've done a lot of gum chewing, one or the other. We've got to do the other now.
Okay. Michael Linden, Managing Director for Economic Policy for the Center for American Progress. We appreciate your time with us today, Michael. Look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Political scientist Elaine Kamarck offers advice to Republicans based on what happened to Democrats 25 years ago. She says you don't need unity. You need a fight within your own party to come up with better policies. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Having been raised in a small business family and now running my own small business, I always find it heartwarming to see hard-working, enterprising folks get ahead. So I was really touched when I read that even in these hard times, one extended family with 3 generations active in their enterprise is hanging in there and doing well. Chrissy, Jim, Alice, Robbie, Ann, and Nancy are their names, and with good luck and old-fashioned pluck, they've managed to build a family nest egg that totals right at $103 billion. Yes, 6 people, $100+ billion. That means that these 6 hold more wealth than the entire bottom 40% of American families, a stash of riches greater than the combined wealth of some 49 million of their fellow Americans. How touching is that? The good luck that each of them had is that they were either born into or married into the Walton family, which makes them heirs to the Walmart fortune. That's where old-fashioned pluck comes in, for the world's biggest retailer plucks its profits from the threadbare pockets of low-wage American workers and impoverished sweatshop workers around the world. 4 of the Walton heirs rank as the 6th, 9th, 10th, and 11th richest people in our country, possessing a combined net worth of $95 billion. But bear in mind that one's net worth has no relationship to worthiness. These people did nothing to earn their wealth. They just inherited it. And as Walmart plucks more from workers, the heirs grow luckier. In recent years, while the wealth of the typical family plummeted by 39%, the Waltons saw their wealth grow by 22% without having to lift a finger. This is Jim Hightower saying, how odd that the one percenters consider themselves our nation's makers and consider workaday people to be takers. With the Waltons, it's the exact opposite.
If you like these feisty pops of populism that Hightower zings out on the airwaves, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter provides the in-depth lowdown on what the greed heads of Wall Street and the boneheads of Washington are doing to us behind the scenes. With Hightower's saucy Texas humor and truth-telling populist perspective, the lowdown literally can lift you up. And get this, you can have the lowdown delivered to your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Centrist Democratic political analyst Elaine Kamarck says Democrats may have an electoral lock on the presidency, and she thanks a Republican, former California Governor Pete Wilson. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Back in 1989, there was a manifesto written by centrist Democrats William Galston and Elaine Kamarck, which was a sharp critique of their party for not recognizing the fundamental policy problems it had. Now they have revised that essay and applied it to the Republican Party. And our guest today is co-author Elaine Kamarck, now a senior lecturer at the Brookings Institution. Elaine, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're quite welcome. And, you know, if you were advising Republicans, and in effect you are, what advice would you have for how they can become competitive at the presidential level?
Well, I think that they've done some things right and some things they have yet to do. There are many Republican intellectuals and pundits and elected officials who are analyzing the problem correctly. They're saying the right things. They understand that the problem is they are not speaking to the broad majority of the American people, and that they are perceived as out of touch and far more radical than most Americans are, and that is a particular problem for winning presidential elections. You can still do fairly well in gerrymandered congressional districts, but you can't win the presidency. And so I think that there are some Republicans who've gotten the message and gotten the message correctly. What they're not doing is that they don't have an organization that can push the message and confront the base. Bill Galston and I wrote that paper in 1989 under the auspices of the Democratic Leadership Council, which is, now folded its doors, but that's fine. The Democratic Leadership Council spent years magnifying essentially the message that was in our essay, The Politics of Evasion. And they recruited centrist Democrats. They talked about this to the base. We had fights with the base. Most people think that party unity is what's important. When a party is in trouble, unity is not what's important. Discussion and conflict is what's important, because otherwise you're not really grappling with the future of the party. And they're not really doing that yet.
Mm-hmm. What are the demographic and geographic hallmarks of today's Democratic Party, and how are they different than, say, 25, 30 years ago?
Well, the geographic one starts with California. 25 years ago, California started presidential elections with California in the Republican table, and it's not there anymore. California has become a solidly Democratic state, mostly because of the actions of Republican Governor Pete Wilson, who is very anti-immigrant in a state that had a rapidly growing population of Latino immigrants. The second piece of it, the demographic piece, of course, is the Latino population. So as the Republican Party was becoming more and more anti-immigrant, it was having no electoral consequences, and the reason was that the Latino population tended to be a much younger population than the white population. So what we saw in 2012 is voters who had for many years been in kindergarten or kindergartners suddenly were grown up and they were voting. And guess what? They were voting for Democrats. So we've had a geographic change with California and a second geographic change, by the way, with the addition of the northeastern states and mid-Atlantic states to the Democratic, sort of safe Democratic bloc. And we've had a substantial addition to the base of the party with a growing Latino vote. The third thing I would say about this is that the big difference is age. The Republican coalition is an aging coalition. The Democratic coalition is a younger coalition. And if you're looking to the future, you always want the young people, not the old people, for obvious reasons.
Sure. How would you say the Republican electorate has changed?
They are more white, more Southern, and more rural. And that's why they will still be able to retain some power in the House of Representatives, but it's why they are going to have trouble winning Senate seats and a lot of trouble winning presidential elections.
We're speaking with Elaine Kamarck, a senior lecturer at the Brookings Institution. Most people assume that the Republican lock on the House of Representatives will continue for a while, but you say it's not inevitable. How can Democrats then take back the House and keep the Senate?
Well, it is not inevitable. The Democratic lock on Congress ended in 1994, 2 years after Bill Clinton was elected. When you have a demographic wave that is coming, it will not be harmless forever. And so right now the consensus is that the demographics pose problems for Republicans presidentially, but we'll keep the Congress. Not true. Those congressional districts that are represented by Tea Party people, by others, they will experience the same influx of Latinos from other parts of the United States looking for economic opportunity, going into their businesses. They will experience some growth in their young populations, and their younger voters are going to be different than the older voters. The older voters are going to leave us soon, unfortunately, and they will change too. So there's nothing permanent about a congressional majority when they are confronting demographic trends.
Has the middle of the electorate fundamentally shifted on economic and military issues in recent years?
Well, on economic issues, it's kind of gone back and forth. I mean, Clinton took the Democratic Party and made it a much more business-friendly, job-friendly Democratic Party and trade-friendly Democratic Party, which was necessary to bring the party into the 21st century and into a global economy. These days, this is many years now since, I think that we're a little bit more suspicious of unfettered capitalism, and I think the center is hostile to Wall Street, suspicious of big money and big corporations, and so the center is probably a little bit more left than it used to be thanks to the Great Recession. Although by and large they still blame that on George Bush. Right.
I don't know why that made me laugh so much, but it did. When President Obama is no longer on the ticket, will the Republican voter become less extreme and consider the actual economic policies of another Democrat? In other words, is he the reason there are no Republican moderates? Because it feels that way.
Yeah, the problem with analyzing President Obama is that, and how people feel about him, is that you just can't figure out how much racism there is below the surface, right?
Yeah.
I mean, with Clinton, there was a lot of hostility. Okay, I must say there was a lot of hostility. Gingrich took over the Congress. The Contract on America was pretty extreme. We call it the Contract on America. They called it the Contract with America.
Right.
But so, I mean, it was pretty extreme. I don't know why the Tea Partiers are so incredibly hostile to Obama, although, the Newt Gingrich class that came in '94, they closed down the government, and then they tried to impeach Bill Clinton. So they didn't like him much one bit either, and he wasn't black. So, again, it's sort of hard to distinguish, is there racism going on here? Is this the reason for the intensity of the dislike? Or is this basically, we've seen this movie before, and it really doesn't have a racist base?
Well, the other thing too about
the answer to that.
But the other thing about the Clinton period, though, is that everybody was making money just throwing darts at a stock listing, right? I mean, so economically, we were in a heck of a lot better shape than we have been since this current president first took office.
Yeah.
So
that's probably has something. It probably has something to do. Probably has something to do with that. Clinton had a very, very favorable economy. For both of his terms. I mean, almost full employment.
Right. It probably as close as we'll ever see.
Probably as close as we'll see for a while, that's for sure.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about Hillary? Is she a lock for the nomination and the election? Should she choose to go that route?
It's hard to say. I would think so, just because she is by far and away, the most admired person in the party, and she certainly has the gravitas to be president. So I think she probably is for the nomination. And given the reluctance of the Republicans to sort of engage in the hard work of party building, which we talked about earlier, I would say that she could probably win an election as well. So I'd say chances are pretty good. But, a lot of things happen. And, who knows if she'll end up running after all.
Okay. Elaine Kamarck, senior lecturer at the Brookings Institution. She was the co-author of a 1989 manifesto along with Democrat William Galston. It was a sharp critique of the Democratic Party, and they revised that essay and applied it to the Republican Party, and joined us here today to talk about that on americasdemocrats.org. Elaine, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you back sometime soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
You're quite
Bye-bye.
welcome. Bye-bye. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Representative Colleen Hanabusa of Hawaii.
This is day 3 of the shutdown, and Republicans, particularly the Tea Party members of the House, leading John Boehner by the nose, or some other part of his anatomy, have dug in their heels, and it looks like it's going to go on and on for her insights into what's happening. We welcome in the studio Congresswoman Colleen Hanabusa from the great state of Hawaii. Congresswoman, nice to see you. Thanks
for having me.
And we're joined this entire hour as a friend of Bill. Evan McMorris Santoro covers the White House for BuzzFeed. Evan, good to have you on board. I have to ask you, Congresswoman, so, I have a lot of friends in the Congress, particularly from California, where I'm from, and they go home like every weekend, which is, it's a long flight, right? 5.5 hours. How about you?
We can't go home every weekend. Matter of fact,
right, I would think.
Matter of fact, I told Nancy Pelosi when I first got elected that you realize, right, we make you the Midwest. And she kind of was startled, but she kind of chuckled and she said, "That's right." I said, "When I pass California, I'm only halfway home."
That's right. I was thinking because in any flight you go to L.A. 5.5 hours, and then or San
Honolulu
Francisco,
after that,
change
right?
planes, and then Honolulu, another 5.5 hours.
That's right.
Or there are non-stops from California to Maui and to the Big Island, correct?
Mm-hmm. There are, and
Yeah.
they're trying to boost the non-stops to other like the Big Island and so forth. And I'm not quite sure where they are right now in terms of being able to do that. But yeah, Maui definitely they do have it, and a lot of it is constrained by the length of our runways. What we can do. So that's part of it. But
Well, it's
we
a
used to have-
wonderful, wonderful state, and each island has its own, things to offer, its own personality, its own character. And when you're out there, Evan, sometimes I feel like I'm not really in the United States, but it's nice to know that you are in the United States.
Well, after 9/11, one of the most important statistics that we had, I was the in the Hawaii State Legislature at that time, was that we actually had the greatest recovery because of the fact that we were safe. Though we were,
yeah.
though I hate the fact that we've been called exotic when the president comes to visit, we were considered very safe. So we picked up a lot in terms of tourism after 9/11.
That's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's get right down to the news of the day. We're day 3. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? Any way out of this shutdown?
The only way we're going to see any relief from what we're going through is at some point, I think the majority of the majority party is just going to have to stand up and say enough is enough. We've heard rumors at every juncture along the way that we've picked up 20 Republicans who would join, 17. We heard about a meeting that 15 of them had with Speaker Boehner saying enough is enough, send out a clean CR. I think that the best way to explain this is we have a good way of putting it in Hawaii, save face. In other words, how do you save face after doing this? It started with a whole thing about Obamacare. When we started initially with the defunding, then we went to those crazy delays, and the delays, and then we had the medical device tax, and then again the individual mandate, sending it back twice, and now we're down to this new trick, which is they'll pick and choose which ones of the departments they want to fund, and then they'll do that. And it's like, it's almost like just bleeding people and say, and we know what's going to happen. Like the departments they don't like HHS, are probably not going to be funded, or the EPA is not going to be funded. But once you start down this road, that's exactly what's going to happen. So, but notice no Obamacare anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
All
no
right.
Obamacare. So it's like, okay, what's really important? So is it this so that they get back to Obamacare? And is it really just doing something to be able to say they did Obamacare? Where I thought, as it was rolling out, that they might have had an interesting plan was the medical device tax. If they had not sent two, that the speaker could join them together, the leader could join them together, had they sent one, they may have caused some problems, because there was like a resolution vote earlier this year where 79 of the senators, of the 100 senators, voted for its repeal. So, it's almost like they misstepped. They thought they were getting a little
Reached too far.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Are Democrats going to stay unified as under this pressure of all these little mini bills? I mean, we've seen so far they have, but I mean, a lot of these bills are sort of tailor-made for campaign ads, right? Like, oh, you voted against what we saw, opening the hospitals for children with cancer, or the one they tried that we've been talking about this week, the letting veterans into the World War II memorial.
Right.
Do you think of this unanimity that we're seeing, this unified Democratic caucus, is that going to stay as this thing goes on?
I think it is going to stay, and the reason why is because I think that what the Republicans are doing is they're throwing their best shots out, and for some, like for example, the troops, we knew what was happening when the troops started, but of course, that was a unanimous vote. But with the veterans, that the veterans, for example, won't get their checks. The issue is the new processing. and they will get their checks on time. The funds are there, and it's the new processing. But in checking,
which will be delayed, right? Or
well, no. Apparently, the latest report that my office received is that they're fine for 2 to 4 weeks.
Oh, I see.
So,
Okay.
so it's not urgent right now. That even with 2 to 4 weeks, we shouldn't see. And when you look at the numbers, that's the other interesting thing. When you look at the numbers, I think the Washington Post did this. Is that you have something like 330 some odd thousand employees within veterans, and I think of them, only about 14,000 is subject to furlough. So 300 and the 320 some odd thousand are going to continue. So it really is. Optics are bad, and if they say you're doing this, but when you really begin to dissect what it is, then you see that it's not as they are portraying it. But you can't. When I speak to you, I can go through that and say, "Hey, this, and this." But in a 30-second soundbite, what do you say except you're lying or that's not true?
I want to go back to your phrase, "enough is enough," because I think it's important to point out that the 95 last time we had a shutdown, it ended when then Majority Leader Bob Dole went on the floor of the Senate and said, enough is enough. And that was it. There was no, okay, I'll do this if you do that. He finally just said, okay, enough's enough. We made our point. All right, let's resolve this and we'll just move on. So that's a key phrase. What's happening in the House, of course, it's often cited, is that the Speaker will not allow the clean resolution, or CR, to come up for a vote because he wants to follow the Hastert rule, whereby he has to have a majority of the majority. And that's what the few Tea Partiers have been able to block. Denny Hastert is quoted this morning. The Daily Beast, I don't know whether you saw it yet, Evan, has a story where Eleanor Clift interviewed Denny Hastert yesterday, and he said, "What Hastert rule?" He said, "I never adopted any rule like that. I don't want any rule named after me." He said, "I think it's a stupid idea." At one time, he just sort of said something like, "Yeah, I'd prefer to have a majority of my own members with me on," but that was just like an offhand remark, and it's become, this holy of holies, right? That you can't violate.
Well, no, it's not, because
But it's not an official House rule, is it?
It's not well, it's not, but the other thing of it is that they've breached it themselves. The Violence Against Women's Act would not have come to the floor if they enforced the Hastert rule, because we only had 80 some odd Republicans, and it was carried by the Democrats. So when it's convenient and when the Speaker wants to do it, or when he has that solid, because the more moderate Republicans, for lack of a better description, when they stand up and they say, we're not going to take this, and he put it down. So the Hastert rule is not something that's laid in stone that they can't violate, because they've done it.
Oh, do you feel like, we keep seeing every day stories of more moderate Republicans sort of shifting over to the Democratic position and for this clean CR. Do you see that being the way that this ends, or do you think it ends with some kind of with Boehner acting only?
I think that I've said from the beginning of this whole process that it's going to come down for what price speakerdom. What is the price you're willing to pay for speakerdom? So I think that it's going to be that group that they actually say, we've stood by you. We've even let you do this to us, but it's time for you to be the guy we supported. I think it's going to take that, because I don't think with everything that's gone on that he's willing to put speakerdom up for grabs right now. So I think that's what it's going to come down to.
And that raises the question, which we will get into with a good congresswoman from Hawaii, Colleen Hanabusa, and with Emma McMorris Santor when we come back, about who is the real Speaker of the House of Representatives. With Congresswoman Colleen Hanabusa from Hawaii and Evan McMorris Santoro from BuzzFeed here. So, Congresswoman, there is a question about who's really running the show over there. Senator Chuck Schumer had a comment on that yesterday on the floor.
Now, Speaker Boehner is an accomplice in the Tea Party shutdown, and everyone knows it. So he's trying desperately to wriggle out of the hot seat by passing one-off bills and making half-hearted efforts to reopen pieces of the government. Speaker Boehner's in this position because, sadly, he's become a puppet, with Ted Cruz pulling the strings.
You've probably seen the website speakercruz.com.
That's right. That's right.
But it does seem like Ted Cruz is sort of telling members of the Tea Party in the House what to do. Huh?
Well, you know, we're trying to figure out whether the number is 30 or whether it's 40, and
of the hardliners.
Of the hardliners, and you know, and still the math just doesn't work out.
What do you get, Evan? What is your?
We hear about 30, you know, but between 30 and 40. I mean, I think it depends on how bad the polls get. I mean, that's really what shakes people around often.
Because the New York Times yesterday identified 20 as the real hardliners, and so then maybe they get another 10 or 15 to vote with them, right? But
we're supposed to have 20 who are supposed to be with us, so you know they should cancel each other out. Just pure math, they should cancel each other out. But there's something else going on.
Huffington Post this morning quotes a Republican congressman saying, I think this sort of sums up what's going on. Quote, "We're not going to be disrespected. We have to get something out of this. And I don't know what that even is."
That's right.
So, as you said a little earlier, like saving face. Well, they got to get something, but they don't even know. They know they're not going to get what they want. But
I mean, they did get one thing, right? I mean, sequester is pretty much here to stay. Is that right? Do you believe? I mean, now that the negotiation tactic is to a sequester level budget, where sequester's here for the foreseeable future.
So the Democrat position has been, look, you got your level. We've given in on your level. We don't want that level. We want it at the BCA cap level. But we're going to I think it's I get them all mixed up. I think it's the 286 level. 986 level.
986.
986
is where it is today, which is very close to the Paul Ryan.
Right. It is the Paul Ryan. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you got that. So, you know, let's move on. But it's like they don't want it anymore. They can't decide what they want. It's like they started with this whole defunding Obamacare, basically embarrassing the president on Obamacare. But now we're going to open it piecemeal. Excuse me.
And now Speaker Boehner is saying, well, I don't know whether he said that. I'm paraphrasing. What's really important is the debt ceiling. So let's tie it all to the debt ceiling. The consequences of which would be far worse than the shutdown, correct?
Oh, I think the interesting thing about the debt ceiling is that then you'll see Wall Street and you'll see the banks and you'll see the chamber and people like that, I think, really put on the pressure.
We saw a little bit of that yesterday at the White House. Do you need some more water?
That's what yesterday's negotiation was about. I mean, they came down and they were there for this hour-long meeting. People were speculating all this stuff was going to happen. Really, it seems to be now they're trying to, put it all together into one thing.
But I was talking about earlier in the day, we had the leaders of Wall Street, the Financial Forum or whatever, meet with the president, and they came out and spoke to us reporters afterwards. And Lloyd Blankfein, I guess, Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, who was the spokesperson who said, we just told the president that failure to raise a debt ceiling would send this economy in a tailspin.
But he's not the one they need to speak to. They need to speak to the guys in our House that are the Republicans. I think the president and the Democrats feel that this is really the ultimate goal and possibly what they're going to try to hold hostage for all of this, for the debt ceiling and whatever they want in the debt ceiling. But I agree. That is going to be the worst scenario. But it doesn't seem like there's enough pressure building, because if they give on this, then what happens with the debt ceiling?
He said that they were going to take that same message to the Hill and to the Republican leadership on the Hill.
I mean, we saw in 2011, we had this discussion that there's a lot of Republicans who don't know that that's going to be such a terrible idea. I mean, we saw people, even like Paul Ryan, saying, it may not be that big a deal to have this default if it were to happen. So, I mean, I'm not sure how solid that message lands up there.
What do you hear from the people in your district? Do they care? Do they know? Do they care?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a large number of federal employees, about 20,000 that are just DOD, and an additional 25,000 that are federal employees.
Yeah.
So just like with sequestration, the people at home do care. And I've had I've had people come here on vacation who were actually either employed by the federal government or were employed by the federal government, and they are very much aware of it, and they are concerned as to what this means. You know, we have, as I say, the president said we're pivoting to Asia Pacific, and what's right smack in the middle is Hawaii. You know, though when we grew up, the map sort of split the Pacific. Now, when you really look at the map of the world, 55% of the Earth's surfaces and so forth, it's Asia Pacific, and this is a major concern as to how this is going to affect us.
Which is why the president really does want to make, one of the reasons he really wants to make this Asia trip this weekend. We don't know whether he's going to be able to do it or not, but with that, we are out of time, and you've got to get back there and work this whole thing out, Congresswoman. We're counting on you today, Congresswoman Colleen Hanabusa. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming in. Come back again.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Michael Linden, Elaine Kamarck, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to America's